Farmer buys a ranch for just $50, then sees 3 Apache sisters and freezes in shock. The story begins with a man whose name few remembered, because in truth, he had spent most of his life forgotten. He was a farmer, one of those men who tilled the earth with his bare hands, who woke before dawn only to see the same dry soil, the same stubborn weeds, and the same endless loneliness. For years, he had worked land that wasn't his. Landlords took the profits, merchants took the crops, and all he was left with was calloused hands and empty pockets. Yet still, in his heart, he carried a dream, small, fragile, but unshakable. A dream that one day, he would own a piece of earth that belonged to him. Not borrowed, not rented, not loaned. His own ranch. A place where no one could tell him when to leave or how much he owed. But dreams cost money, and money was something he never seemed to have. Underscore 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 underscore. One evening, after another long day of laboring under the scorching sun, the farmer heard whispers in the village tavern. Men were laughing, drinking, and telling stories. Among their drunken chatter, one tale made his ears sharpen. "Did you hear?" a man said, slamming his mug on the table. "Old McAllister's ranch is being sold. The whole property. Barn, fields, everything. $50 is all it costs." The farmer nearly choked on the stale bread he was eating. $50? That was less than a month's worth of supplies. It didn't make sense. Land, real land, usually cost hundreds, sometimes thousands. "Why so cheap?" someone asked, echoing the farmer's thoughts. The man grinned, lowering his voice. "Because nobody wants it. That place is cursed. Folks say strange things happen there. Lights in the night. Voices carried on the wind. And, the Apache." The mention of that word sent a hush over the table. The Apache, people who had lived on that land long before settlers came. To some, they were enemies. To others, just survivors holding on to what was theirs. But to the farmer, all he heard was, a ranch, for $50. Underscore 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 underscore. The very next morning, the farmer scraped together what little he had, coins saved from harvests, borrowed pennies, even the last of his emergency fund, and went to see the land himself. When he told the blacksmith of his plan, the man nearly dropped his hammer. "You'd be a fool," the blacksmith warned. "That land doesn't stay empty without reason. 3 families tried living there. Not one lasted. You buy it, and you'll be running before the month is out." Another villager spat on the ground. "Best stay away. Some places don't belong to men like us. Some places, remember." But the farmer only smiled faintly. What did he have to lose? Poverty already had its grip on him. Loneliness already haunted his nights. If the land was cursed, let it be cursed. At least it would be his. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his small cot, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. His mind spun with pictures, of cattle grazing on open fields, of corn swaying in the wind, of a home filled with laughter instead of silence. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. The villagers' warnings echoed, but he drowned them out. He had known hardship all his life. What difference did it make if hardship followed him to new soil? $50. That was the price of a single dream. And so, by dawn, he had made his decision. Underscore 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 underscore. The farmer packed what little he owned, a wool blanket, a rusty lantern, a worn-out Bible, and a single pistol he had never once fired. He tied his belongings onto the back of his mule and set off down the dusty trail that led away from the village and into the unknown. The further he rode, the quieter the world became. Civilization faded behind him. No more chatter of markets. No more clanging of the blacksmith's hammer. Just the sound of the wind and the creak of leather straps. The land stretched out endlessly, wild and untamed. Sagebrush swayed in the breeze, and the sun bled orange across the horizon. It was beautiful, yes, but there was a weight in the air, heavy and watchful, as if unseen eyes were following him with every step. By nightfall, he reached the boundary of what would soon be his ranch. Underscore 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 underscore. It wasn't much to look at. A sagging barn leaned to one side like a drunkard about to collapse. The main house was little more than a wooden shell, its windows broken, roof missing shingles. The fence posts were splintered and half-buried. But to the farmer, it was not ruin. It was possibility. He could see past the decay. He saw wheat where there were weeds, strong fences where there were gaps, a roaring hearth where only dust lay. He stood there in the moonlight, staring at it all, and whispered to himself, "This is it. My dream. My land." But dreams have shadows. As he unpacked his mule and prepared to make a fire, a chill ran through him. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound, not quite a whisper, not quite a voice. Something between the two. He froze, his eyes darting to the tree-lean. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, figures, faint and distant, slipping between the shadows of the pines. His breath quickened. He tightened his grip on the pistol at his side, though his hand shook with inexperience. But when he blinked, the figures were gone. Only the trees remained, swaying softly in the night. He told himself it was nothing. His mind was playing tricks. The villagers had filled his head with ghost stories, that was all. Yet, as he laid down by the dying fire, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. Underscore 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 underscore. The farmer closed his eyes, whispering a prayer to steady his heart. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would begin. Tomorrow, he would start building a new life. But tomorrow would bring more than he ever bargained for. Because though he didn't yet know it, this ranch was not empty. And the eyes he felt on him in the darkness were real. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, the farmer rose with the sun, his body stiff from sleeping on the cold ground. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of dew and dry earth, and for a moment, he almost forgot where he was. But when his eyes opened fully and he saw the crooked barn and the sagging roof of the house before him, it all came rushing back. This was his land now. His ranch. Bought for the price of $50 and a pocket full of stubborn hope. He stood slowly, brushing the dust from his clothes, and gazed across the stretch of property. It wasn't large, not compared to the sprawling estates of wealthier ranchers, but it was more than he had ever dreamed of owning. The fences leaned, the earth was dry, and the wood of the house was grayed with age, but in his heart, he saw it as something alive. Something that could be brought back. He took his time walking the grounds. Each step stirred up memories of stories he had heard, the warnings of men who claimed the land was cursed, the whispers of Apache spirits haunting the soil. As he passed the old corral, he paused. The posts were cracked, and weeds pushed through the dry earth. Still, he imagined horses there, strong and proud, their manes whipping in the wind. Inside the house, the air was stale. Dust coated the floor, and cobwebs clung to the corners. A broken chair lay on its side, and the fireplace was filled with the ashes of long-forgotten fires. He ran his hand along the wooden wall, rough beneath his fingertips, and smiled faintly. It was fragile, yes, but it was his. For the first time in his life, the walls around him didn't belong to another man. They were his sanctuary, his shelter, his chance to start anew. The farmer spent the day cleaning, moving slowly but with determination. He patched holes in the roof with boards scavenged from the barn. He swept dirt from the floor and cleared broken glass from the windowsills. The work was endless, but each stroke of his hand felt like progress. The place was not beautiful, not yet, but it was breathing again. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the land began to change. The shadows stretched long across the fields, and the silence grew heavier. Out here, there were no neighbors, no voices, no human company at all. The only sounds were the creaking of the house in the wind and the lonely call of a coyote in the distance. That night, he built a fire outside, refusing to sleep in the house just yet. The warmth comforted him, but the emptiness pressed against his chest. He had wanted solitude, had dreamed of a place where no one could reach him, but already the silence felt sharp, almost cruel. He found himself staring into the fire longer than he meant to, as though the flames were the only company he had left. It was then that he noticed something strange. The air shifted, carrying with it the faintest trace of smoke, not from his fire, but from somewhere deeper in the land. He lifted his head, squinting toward the horizon. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of light near the tree line, a glow that didn't belong to the stars. His chest tightened. He rubbed his eyes, blaming exhaustion, yet when he looked again, the light was still there, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. He rose to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at his side. The metal felt cold and unfamiliar in his grip. He wasn't a fighter, wasn't a man used to violence, but something about that glow made the hair on his arms rise. The wind picked up, whispering through the branches. He listened carefully, straining to catch any sound. At first, there was nothing but the rustle of leaves. Then, faintly, voices, low, hushed, like the murmur of prayers carried through the night. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew one thing: he was not alone. His fire crackled behind him as he stared into the dark, torn between stepping forward or retreating into the false safety of the house. His breath quickened, and his eyes darted across the tree line, but the glow was already fading, swallowed by the night. For long minutes he stood frozen, clutching his pistol, ears straining for another sound. But silence returned, heavy and unbroken. Finally, with shaking hands, he lowered the weapon and returned to the fire. He told himself it was nothing. Just the wind, just his imagination. The villagers' stories had planted shadows in his mind, that was all. Still, when he lay down beneath the stars, his eyes refused to close. Somewhere beyond the dark, he felt them, the voices, the glow, the unseen presence of something that did not want him there. And as sleep finally stole over him, one thought pulsed in his mind like the echo of those fading lights: this ranch was never empty. The following morning was brighter, but the farmer carried a heaviness that the sun could not chase away. His eyes stung from a night of restless sleep, his body sore from lying on the hard ground. He tried to push away the memory of the strange glow, the whispers that had brushed against his ears like cold fingers. Work, he told himself. Work would drive the unease from his bones. He spent the early hours repairing the barn door, hammering nails into the crooked frame. Each strike of the hammer rang out sharp in the stillness, echoing into the open fields. The sound should have been comforting, proof of progress, but every few minutes he found himself glancing at the tree line, scanning the shadows for movement. At midday, he led his mule to graze near the corral and sat on an overturned bucket, wiping sweat from his brow. The land stretched around him, vast and silent, and yet, not silent enough. More than once, he thought he heard the soft crunch of footsteps in the distance. More than once, he felt eyes lingering on him, watching from places just out of sight. By the time dusk fell, his nerves were frayed. He carried his lantern into the house, telling himself he would be braver tonight, that he would not let childish fears chase him from the shelter he now owned. He lit a fire in the hearth, the flames dancing across the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him. He forced himself to eat a crust of bread, though it sat heavy in his stomach. Then came the sound. At first, it was faint, a scrape, a shuffle, like someone brushing against the outside wall of the house. The farmer froze, every muscle in his body stiffening. His hand slipped to the pistol lying beside him, fingers curling around the grip. The noise came again, closer this time. Slow, deliberate. He stood, heart hammering, and moved to the window. The lantern light glared against the glass, making it difficult to see beyond, but he caught a flicker of movement in the yard. Someone, slipping past the barn. He extinguished the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. His breath came fast, but he forced himself to creep to the doorway. The night outside was lit by a swollen moon, silver light spreading across the ranch. He stepped onto the porch, pistol in hand, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. And then he saw them. 3 figures stood near the edge of the corral, their forms outlined against the pale glow of the moon. They were not ghosts, not tricks of the mind, they were real. 3 women, standing still as stone, their long dark hair swaying in the wind. Their clothes were simple, but marked with patterns he had seen only once before, on travelers who spoke of Apache tribes. His throat went dry. These were no whispers of the wind, no cursed spirits. They were flesh and blood. 3 sisters, watching him with eyes sharp and unreadable. The eldest stood tall, her arms crossed, her gaze hard as flint. The middle one shifted restlessly, her posture tense, as though she were ready to spring forward at any moment. And the youngest stared at him with wide, curious eyes, her expression softer, though no less piercing. The farmer raised his pistol halfway, then froze. He knew enough not to act foolishly. If these were Apache women, then one wrong move could mean his life. Yet they made no move toward him. They only stood, silent, as if weighing him in their judgment. Finally, the eldest stepped forward, her voice low and firm. "This land is not yours." The words struck him like a hammer. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. His mind raced. How could he explain that he had paid for the ranch, that he had been told it was abandoned? How could he tell them he meant no harm, when harm was exactly what they seemed to expect? He lowered the pistol, letting it hang by his side. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I bought it. With what little I had. I don't want trouble. I only want a home." The middle sister scoffed, her eyes flashing. "Bought? You cannot buy what was never for sale." The youngest tilted her head, studying him. She said nothing, but her gaze lingered, as if searching for truth behind his words. The eldest raised her chin, her expression unyielding. "This is our place. You will leave." The farmer swallowed hard, his heart thundering. He wanted to argue, to plead, but he knew tonight was not the night for defiance. Instead, he nodded slowly, though his feet did not move. The sisters exchanged glances, their whispers too soft for him to hear. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they turned and melted back into the trees, their figures swallowed by the night. For a long time, the farmer stood frozen in the yard, the pistol trembling in his hand. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating, but the truth was now undeniable. The ranch was not abandoned. It was guarded. And he was no longer simply a lonely man chasing a dream. He was a trespasser. That night, the farmer could not rest. He lay on his cot inside the creaking house, the fire in the hearth dying down to glowing embers, shadows flickering against the wooden walls. His mind replayed the vision of the three sisters, their eyes burning into him, their voices sharp as knives. He had never felt so small, so powerless on land he thought was his own. Determined to keep watch, he feigned sleep, his body still under the blanket, his breathing slowed to the rhythm of slumber. But his ears were wide awake, straining against the quiet. Hours passed, the night deepened, and then he heard it, the soft crunch of feet outside his door. Whispered voices, hushed and urgent, carried through the cracks in the wall. He held his breath. It was them. The eldest spoke first, her tone low and commanding. "He must go. This land is not his. It belongs to us, as it always has." The middle one's voice followed, sharper, edged with defiance. "Why drive him away when we can use him? A man alone is a tool waiting to be bent. He can work, repair, guard. Let him stay until he is no longer needed." The youngest, her voice soft as a sigh, said, "He does not seem cruel. He could have raised his weapon against us, but he did not. Maybe he is not like the others." The farmer's stomach twisted. They were debating his fate as if he were no more than an animal, a stray intruder whose worth must be measured before being cast out or caged. Sweat slicked his palms though the night was cold. He dared not move, dared not breathe too loudly, lest they realize he was listening. The eldest sister spoke again, firm, unwavering. "Trust no settler. They come with kind words and take with fire. We will watch him. If he proves dangerous, we will end it." The middle one scoffed. "Better to end it now. Why wait for the snake to strike?" The youngest whispered, "Not all snakes bite." Their voices faded, drifting into silence, and after a moment, the farmer heard the soft retreat of their footsteps as they slipped back into the dark. Still, he did not move. He lay frozen beneath his blanket, heart pounding so loudly he feared it would betray him. The fire had nearly died, the last ember glowing like a watchful eye, but he could not bring himself to close his own. He knew then, with chilling certainty, that his dream of peace on this land had twisted into something else entirely. He was living in a test he had not chosen, trapped between fear and curiosity, surrounded by three guardians whose intentions were as dangerous as they were mysterious. The night stretched long, and though exhaustion weighed heavy on him, his mind would not release him. For even in the silence, he could still hear their voices, lingering like smoke in his ears. He must go. He can be used. He may not be cruel. And so, caught between hope and dread, the farmer realized the truth: his fate was no longer his alone to decide. The following days unfolded with a strange rhythm, a balance between silence and tension that kept the farmer's nerves stretched tight. He worked as he always did, patching the broken fences, gathering wood, and tending to the soil that might one day yield crops. Yet always, at the edge of his vision, he felt their presence. The sisters were never far. He would catch a glimpse of them watching from the trees, or hear their low voices carried on the wind. They did not approach, but they did not vanish either. It was as though they were studying him, weighing his every action, deciding what sort of man he truly was. At first, he moved stiffly, careful not to provoke them. He placed tools down slowly, avoided reaching for his pistol, and kept his eyes lowered when he thought they were near. But as time went on, he found himself speaking into the silence, as though talking to the air. He spoke of the weather, of the work he had done, of the ache in his back. He spoke of his loneliness, of the dream he carried that had brought him here. He did not know if they listened, but sometimes he thought he heard the faintest stir of movement, as if his words had touched them. One afternoon, while chopping wood, the eldest appeared without warning. She stepped from the trees, tall and unflinching, her arms crossed over her chest. The farmer froze, the axe halfway raised. Her gaze was sharp, hard as stone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice firm but even, she said, "You work like a man who wants to stay." His throat tightened. He lowered the axe slowly. "I came here to build a life. Not to steal, not to harm." Her eyes narrowed. "Words are thin. The land remembers more than you think." And just as suddenly as she had come, she turned and disappeared again, leaving him with the weight of her warning. That night, the middle sister drew near. He saw her standing by the barn, her posture restless, her eyes bright with something fierce. When he approached, cautious and slow, she did not move away. Instead, she tilted her head, studying him with a smirk. "You are alone," she said. "Men alone grow desperate. Desperate men are dangerous." He swallowed, unsure how to answer. "Desperation brought me here," he admitted. "But danger? No. I've had enough of fighting the world. All I want is peace." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Peace is an illusion. You will see." Then she vanished into the shadows, as though swallowed by the night itself. It was the youngest who unsettled him most. She came quietly, almost shyly, one cold evening when the wind cut through his coat and the fire in the hearth burned low. He had been drifting in and out of sleep when he felt movement near his bed. His eyes flew open, and there she was, slipping beneath his blanket, her small frame trembling from the cold. His heart pounded, confusion and fear rushing through him. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Her eyes met his, wide and innocent, filled with a trust that both disarmed and frightened him. "It is cold," she murmured simply. "I do not mean harm." For a long moment, he lay frozen, every muscle tense. Yet her presence was not threatening, not sharp like her sister's. It was quiet, fragile, and strangely comforting. He could feel the warmth of her body against his, a reminder that he was no longer entirely alone. Sleep did not come easily after that. His mind raced with questions, with fear of what this closeness might mean. If the eldest discovered her, would she see it as betrayal? If the middle sister knew, would she strike in anger? And yet, as the youngest drifted into calm breathing beside him, the farmer felt a part of his loneliness ease for the first time in years. When dawn came, she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. Only the faint impression on the blanket told him it had not been a dream. From that day on, the air between him and the sisters shifted. There was still mistrust, still the sharp edge of warning in their glances, but there was also something new, an invisible thread pulling them closer, testing the fragile line between fear and kinship. The farmer did not know where it would lead, only that the land no longer felt entirely empty. And with each passing day, the silence of his ranch grew less cruel, replaced by something far more dangerous, possibility. The days rolled into one another, each marked by the uneasy rhythm of work and watchfulness. The farmer rose with the sun, patched fences, gathered wood, and tilled the stubborn earth, all the while knowing he was never truly alone. The sisters lingered always, sometimes seen, sometimes only sensed, their presence like shadows stretching across his every step. One afternoon, as he carried buckets of water from the well, he found the eldest sister waiting near the corral. She stood tall, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp as blades. For a long moment, she said nothing, and the silence pressed heavy on him. Then, in a tone that brooked no argument, she asked, "Why do you remain, when you have been told to leave?" His voice was steady, though his heart raced. "Because this is all I have. $50 and a dream. If I walk away, I have nothing again." Her gaze narrowed. "Dreams mean little when they trample over others. You stand on soil that remembers blood." He wanted to answer, to tell her he meant no disrespect, but the weight of her stare silenced him. She turned without another word, her figure disappearing into the trees like mist, leaving him with guilt twisting in his gut. That night, the middle sister appeared by his fire. She sat without asking, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You work hard," she said, almost mocking. "But no matter how hard you work, you will never make this land yours. Not truly." He stared into the flames, unsure how to respond. Then why do you watch me? If I am only an intruder, why not drive me away? Her lips curved into a faint, daring smile. Because I want to see what kind of man you are. Whether you bend or break. The youngest came to him quietly, days later, when the wind howled across the plains. She brought a basket of herbs, laying it gently at his doorstep. He stared at it, startled, and when he looked up, her wide eyes met his. "For the cough you carry in the morning," she said softly, then fled before he could thank her. The farmer's chest tightened, torn between fear and a strange, growing warmth. The sisters were no longer only watchers. They were part of his days, woven into his nights. Their presence unsettled him, but it also carved away at the loneliness that had followed him for years. But the fragile balance shattered when outsiders arrived. It happened on a cold evening. The farmer was in the barn, mending a broken stall door, when the distant sound of horses reached his ears. He stepped outside, squinting against the dying light, and saw them, 3 men on horseback, their silhouettes dark against the horizon. As they drew closer, he recognized them as local ranchers, men from the village he had left behind. They rode with purpose, their eyes sweeping the land, their hands resting near the rifles slung across their saddles. One called out, his voice sharp. "We've heard talk, stranger. That your land ain't so empty after all." The farmer's blood ran cold. He tried to steady his voice. "It's mine. Bought fair, $50. Nothing here but soil and wood." The man on horseback spat to the ground. "Don't play dumb. Folks say they've seen figures out here. Apache women. You keeping them? Hiding them?" The farmer's grip tightened on the barn door. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anger. He wanted to deny it, to send them away, but even as he opened his mouth, movement at the tree lean caught his eye. The sisters were there, watching silently, their faces half hidden in shadow. The ranchers followed his gaze. Their expressions hardened, voices sharp with hostility. "There. I knew it. This land ain't safe if they're here. We'll run them out, or worse." Panic surged through the farmer. He stepped forward, his voice firm though his legs shook. "They are not your concern. Leave them be." The ranchers laughed, the sound cruel and echoing in the stillness. "You've gone soft, farmer. Or maybe they've bewitched you. Either way, if you stand in our way, you'll fall with them." As the men turned their horses toward the tree lean, the farmer's heart wrenched. He glanced back at the sisters. The eldest's gaze was hard, the middle's fierce, the youngest's filled with fear. In that moment, he knew he could no longer pretend neutrality. He could not stand by. He had to choose. The pistol at his side felt heavier than ever, the decision pressing against his chest like iron. If he defended them, he risked his life and the fragile dream he had built. If he betrayed them, he would lose more than land, he would lose the one chance at belonging he had ever known. The air was thick with tension, the moment stretched taut as a bowstring. And in the farmer's heart, the choice began to take root. The night after the rancher's threat, the farmer barely slept. He paced the floorboards of the house, the sound of his boots echoing in the hollow silence. Every creak of wood, every groan of the wind felt like a warning that danger was drawing near. He thought of the eldest sister's hard eyes, the middle one's mocking smile, the youngest's trembling fear. They had watched him with suspicion for days, yet now their fate and his seemed tangled like roots in the same soil. When dawn came, the land was restless. The farmer went about his chores, but his hands shook as he worked, his eyes constantly on the horizon. He knew the ranchers would return, and when they did, they would not come to talk. The weight of choice pressed on him, to side with his own kind or to stand against them. By afternoon, the sisters appeared. This time they did not linger in the shadows. They walked openly toward him, their presence commanding, their steps measured. The eldest spoke first, her voice steady but edged with steel. "The men from the village will come again. You cannot hide from this." The farmer swallowed hard. "I don't want a fight. I only wanted land. A home." The middle sister's eyes burned with fire. "There is no peace here. Not for you, not for us. If you choose to stand aside, they will drive us out. If you choose to fight, you risk death. Which will you choose, farmer?" He looked at them, his chest tight. He saw the strength in the eldest, the fire in the middle, the fragile hope in the youngest. And in their faces, he saw not just strangers, but lives bound to the same ground he now called his own. Slowly, he nodded. "I won't let them take this place from you. Or from me." The eldest studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, her expression softened, only slightly. "Words are easy. We will see if you keep them when blood is at your door." That night, the farmer shared his fire with them. They sat in a circle, silent at first, the flames dancing between them. The middle sister sharpened a blade, the eldest kept watch on the dark horizon, and the youngest glanced at the farmer with quiet curiosity. For the first time, they were not only watchers and intruder, they were allies, if only for a moment. As the fire cracked and the night deepened, the youngest finally spoke. "Why do you help us? We are not your people." The farmer's gaze lingered on the flames. "Because I know what it is to have nothing. To lose everything and still want to keep going. Maybe it's foolish, but this place, it's all I've got. And maybe it's all you've got too. If I walk away, I lose more than land. I lose myself." Her eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, she smiled. The farmer's heart caught at the sight, but the weight of the coming storm quickly returned. The following day, the ranchers came as promised. Dust rose on the horizon as their horses thundered closer, rifles slung across their shoulders, determination etched into their faces. The farmer stood at the edge of his property, his pistol heavy in his hand, the sisters flanking him like shadows of the earth itself. The leader of the riders sneered when he saw the scene. "So it's true. You side with them. You'd betray your own blood for theirs?" The farmer's voice was steady, though fear churned in his gut. "I side with what's right. This land was theirs long before it was sold to me. And now it's ours. You'll have to spill blood to take it." The riders laughed, but there was no humor in it. They shifted in their saddles, hands tightening on their weapons. The air grew thick, the silence stretching, until it seemed the land itself was holding its breath. And then, like the crack of thunder, the standoff erupted. Gunfire split the air, the horses reared, and the sisters moved with fierce precision, swift, silent, unyielding. The farmer fired his pistol, each shot wild but desperate, fueled by the weight of his choice. He was no soldier, but he was a man who had finally found something worth defending. The fight raged across the ranch, chaos tearing through the fragile dream he had built. The barn echoed with shouts, the fences splintered under hooves, and the earth drank the violence of men unwilling to share. By the time the dust began to settle, the farmer's world had changed. He stood breathing hard, his clothes torn, his hands trembling from the recoil of his weapon. Around him, silence slowly returned, heavy and final. The sisters were at his side, their faces fierce but unbroken. The ranchers had fled, their pride wounded, their threat only delayed. But the farmer knew they would not forget, and they would not forgive. As the sun sank low, painting the sky in blood-red hues, he realized his choice had bound him to the sisters forever. There was no going back. He had turned his back on his own kind, and in doing so, tied his fate to theirs. And though the fight was over, the true cost of his decision was only beginning to reveal itself. The quiet after the battle was uneasy, as if the land itself had paused to take stock of what had happened. The farmer stood among the ruins of the corral, his breath still ragged, his pistol heavy in his hand. Smoke drifted from the barn, where a lantern had fallen during the fight and scorched one of the doors. He had defended the ranch, defended the sisters, but his heart was torn. He knew this was not the end. The ranchers would return, angrier, stronger, unwilling to accept humiliation. The sisters lingered nearby, silent shadows against the setting sun. The eldest's face was stern, unreadable, though her gaze lingered on the farmer longer than it had before. The middle sister paced like a restless animal, her hands tight around her blade, muttering curses against the men who had dared intrude. The youngest stood closer to the farmer, her expression soft, almost grateful, though fear still lingered in her eyes. When night fell, they gathered in the house. The fire crackled, the glow painting their faces in gold and shadow. It was the eldest who spoke first, her tone low and solemn. "Now you see. The men who claim this land will never leave us in peace. They sell it cheap because it carries our blood. They hope someone like you will drive us out. You were not given a ranch, you were given a burden." The farmer's chest tightened. He stared into the flames. Then why stay? Why not leave this place and begin again somewhere else? The middle sister's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Leave? And abandon what was left to us? You think we cling to this land out of pride? No, farmer. We stay because it holds what others would take." The eldest's voice cut through, calm but firm. "This soil carries more than memory. Beneath it lies the resting place of our kin. Our mother, our father, our ancestors before them. To walk away is to betray them. And beyond the graves, deeper still, there is a secret the ranchers suspect but do not understand." The farmer lifted his eyes, startled. "What secret?" The youngest looked at her sisters, as if asking permission. When they gave none, she spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "There is a place hidden beyond the western ridge, where the earth caves and the rocks guard what lies within. It is not gold, as some believe, though treasure seekers have hunted for it. It is older. Sacred. It is what binds us here." Her words sent a chill through him. He remembered the strange lights he had seen on his first nights, the whispers carried by the wind, the feeling of being watched. The land had never been empty, it had been alive with memory and mystery, and he had stepped blindly into it. The middle sister leaned closer, her eyes glinting. "The ranchers know there is something here. They think it's wealth. They think it's gold buried by our fathers. That is why they come. Not for justice. Not for peace. For greed. The farmer clenched his fists. And me? I paid $50. What was I buying? The eldest's gaze met his, unwavering. You bought yourself into a war you do not understand. They sold you the land not as a gift, but as bait. A pawn to draw us out. You are the price they paid to stir us from the shadows. The truth hit him like a blow. He had not been chosen by luck, not blessed with fortune, but tricked, lured into a trap by men who never intended him to prosper. His dream of a home had been nothing more than a mask for their scheme. He rose from the fire, pacing the small room. His heart thudded in his chest, a storm of anger and fear colliding inside him. So I am nothing more than a fool. A man bought and sold, thrown into the middle of a fight I never asked for. The youngest stood then, her eyes gentle. You are not a fool. You are here now. You have fought beside us. Whether you asked for it or not, you are part of this place. The eldest added, her voice softer than before, if you choose to leave, you may. No one will stop you. But if you stay, you must know, this ranch will never be only yours. It belongs to those who came before, and to those willing to bleed for it. Silence hung heavy after her words. The farmer stared into the fire, the flames twisting like the thoughts in his mind. Leave and return to nothing. Stay and face the wrath of the village, the greed of the ranchers, the mystery buried in the soil. The choice weighed on him more than any he had ever made. For the first time, he understood, the $50 ranch was not cheap at all. It was the most costly purchase of his life. The storm broke with violence. The ranchers returned at dusk, their silhouettes rising against the horizon like vultures circling a dying beast. Dust kicked up beneath the hooves of their horses, rifles gleaming in the last red light of day. This time they came not as a handful of men testing his resolve but as a small army, half a dozen riders, grim-faced and eager for blood. The farmer stood at the edge of the property, the weight of his pistol pulling heavy at his hip, the sisters flanking him in silence. The eldest's jaw was set, her eyes cold and unyielding. The middle sister's fingers danced along the edge of her blade, hungry for the fight to begin. The youngest lingered close, her fear plain, but her resolve firm. Together, they were a strange and fragile line against the tide of men bearing down on them. The ranchers reined in their horses just outside the broken fence. Their leader, the same man who had threatened him days before, spat into the dirt and sneered. You've made your choice, farmer. You throw your lot in with savages, then you'll fall with them. This land ain't for them, and it sure as hell ain't for you. The farmer's voice shook, but he forced it to be steady. This land was never yours to give. And it's not yours to take. The man's laugh was cold, cruel. Then we'll take it in blood. The first shot rang out like thunder. The world exploded into chaos. Horses screamed, gunfire tore through the air, and the night filled with smoke and fury. The farmer fired wildly, the kick of the pistol jolting through his arms. He had never been a soldier, never trained to kill, but desperation made him fierce. Each shot was not just survival, it was a claim, a stand for something greater than himself. The eldest moved like a force of nature, her bowstring snapping, arrows flying swift and sure into the night. The middle sister was a whirlwind, her blade flashing in the firelight, cutting down any who dared draw too close. The youngest, though trembling, stayed by the farmer's side, reloading his weapon with clumsy but determined hands, her courage holding him steady when his own faltered. The barn became the heart of the battle. Lanterns toppled, flames spread across the dry wood, smoke curling into the sky. Shadows danced in the inferno as the ranchers tried to force their way in, believing the sisters would retreat inside. But they held the line together, fighting not for survival alone, but for the soul of the land itself. The farmer's ears rang with the roar of gunfire, the screams of men and horses. His chest heaved, lungs burning from smoke, his hands slick with sweat. In the chaos, he saw one of the riders charging straight toward the youngest sister. Without thinking, he threw himself into the path, knocking her aside as a bullet grazed his arm. Pain flared, hot and searing, but he stayed on his feet, his eyes locked on the enemy who had nearly taken her life. He pulled the trigger, and the man toppled from his horse, crashing into the dirt. The youngest's hands clutched his sleeve, her eyes wide with shock and something more, something that looked like trust. The fight raged on, but one by one, the ranchers fell or fled. The ground was littered with broken weapons and the groans of the wounded. Flames devoured part of the barn, sparks flying into the dark sky. By the time silence finally fell, the farmer's body trembled with exhaustion, his pistol empty, his ears ringing from the cacophony of violence. The sisters stood with him, bruised and bloodied but unbroken. The eldest's bow was splintered, the middle sister's blade nicked and dulled, the youngest streaked with ash. Yet in their eyes burned the same fire that had carried them through, the will to endure. The leader of the ranchers, wounded and furious, staggered back onto his horse. He glared at the farmer, his voice ragged with hate. This ain't over. You'll regret siding with them. The whole valley will see to that." With those words, he spurred his horse and vanished into the night, his men limping after him. The land fell quiet again, the silence broken only by the crackle of the burning barn and the ragged breaths of the survivors. The farmer lowered his weapon, his body aching, his heart heavy. He knew the ranchers would return with more men, that the village itself might rise against them. Tonight had been only one battle in a war far larger than he had imagined. But as he stood there, the sisters at his side, he also knew there was no turning back. He had chosen his place, chosen his people. For better or worse, his fate was bound to theirs now. The ranch still smoldered, the fences broken, the field scarred by hoof and fire. Yet in the farmer's heart, amid the ruin and smoke, something new had taken root, something stronger than fear. This land was no longer just a dream bought for $50. It was a bond sealed in blood. The dawn that followed was painted in ash and silence. The barn still smoldered, sending thin ribbons of smoke curling into the sky. The corral lay broken, the earth scarred by hooves and bullets, and the house creaked as if it, too, bore the weight of the night before. The farmer stood at the edge of the field, his arm bandaged clumsily with strips of cloth, staring at what remained of his $50 dream. The sisters were beside him, silent in their own thoughts. The eldest's face was set like stone, but the sharpness in her eyes had softened. The middle sister paced restlessly, her blade now dulled and bent from battle, her energy simmering beneath her skin. The youngest lingered close, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her expression a mixture of fear and fragile hope. The farmer breathed deep, tasting smoke on the wind. He knew the ranchers would not forget the humiliation of the fight. They would return with more men, perhaps with the law itself, and when they came, they would not stop until the ground ran red. He had tied his fate to this place, and there was no undoing it. That night, as they gathered by the hearth, the eldest spoke in a low, steady voice. "You see now. This ranch is no gift. It was never meant to be a blessing. It was a snare, a burden. Yet you stayed, and you fought. For that, you are no longer only a stranger." The middle sister's mouth curved in a crooked smile. "You're still a fool. But you're our fool now." The youngest reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they closed around his. "You could leave," she whispered. "Even now. You could walk away and save yourself." The farmer looked into her eyes, then at the sisters, then at the blackened remains of the barn outside. His voice was rough but certain. "If I walk away, I return to nothing. Here, at least, I've found something worth standing for. If this land asks for blood, then mine will water it too." A silence fell, deep and heavy, but it was no longer filled with mistrust. Something had shifted, as though the earth itself recognized his vow. The sisters exchanged glances, and though none spoke it aloud, a bond had been sealed between them, fragile, dangerous, yet undeniable. Days later, as he worked to rebuild the broken corral, he felt that bond in every swing of the hammer, every plank set back into place. The sisters helped in their own ways, the eldest guiding, the middle laboring beside him with restless strength, the youngest gathering herbs to treat his wounds. The ranch was scarred, but it was alive, and in its survival, so too was their own. Yet the farmer knew the price. The ranchers would come again. The valley would rise against them. The land itself seemed cursed to demand sacrifice from any who claimed it. But he also knew something deeper now, something he had not understood when he first placed his coins on that tavern table. $50 had not bought him land. It had bought him destiny. And as the sun set over the wounded ranch, painting the sky in fire and blood, the farmer whispered into the wind, more to himself than anyone else. "This place will break me, or it will make me. But it will never let me go." Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these tales alive.